Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. We are back to the celebrity estate planning topic, and for today's episode, we are going to dive into what happened following the death of Paul Newman. Now, Paul was primarily known for two things. Acting is number one, and Newman's Own, like the salad dressing, but it's actually like a whole food line, as number two. As we always do on celebrity estate planning episodes, let's talk a little bit about Paul as a person first, before we dive into his estate and what happened following his passing, legally speaking. According to Wikipedia and biography.com, Paul was born in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Fast forward time, he graduated high school and enlisted in the U.S. Navy. After serving, he went back to Ohio and attended Kenyon College. Initially, he was on an athletic scholarship and played on the football team. Well, that is until he got in trouble and ended up in jail, which got him kicked off the football team. In an interview he did in 1998, he said, "Since I was determined not to study very much, I majored in theater the last 2 years." That's exactly what ended up happening. He graduated from Kenyon College with a Bachelor of Arts in Drama, as well as Economics. After graduating, he was working at a theater in Wisconsin, and that's where he met his first wife, actress Jacqueline Whitty. Shortly after meeting, they got married and eventually had 3 children, Scott, Susan, and Stephanie. Now, Scott, of note, sadly passed away years later in 1978 of a drug overdose. Nearly 10 years into their marriage, Paul divorced from Jacqueline to marry a lady that he met and co-starred in a Broadway show called Picnic, and that lady's name was Joanne Woodward. Paul and Joanne ended up having 3 children as well, and they were Eleanor, Melissa, and Claire. Paul and Joanne were married all the way until Paul's death, which totaled about 50 years. So, at Paul's death, he left his wife Joanne and 5 children, 2 from his first marriage, Susan and Stephanie, and 3 from his second marriage, Eleanor, Melissa, and Claire. Paul is well known for many things, but if you know of Paul Newman's name, it's likely due to his acting in many big films. His biggest movies being in like the 60s and 70s mostly, and just to kind of name drop a few, he starred in Cool Hand Luke, Harper, Sometimes a Great Nation, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Hustler, The Color of Money, etc. Or you know his name due to something not acting related at all, but food. Now, along with his friend, who was a writer by trade named A.E. Hotchner, which I looked and A.E. stood for something. His real name wasn't A.E. Paul and A.E. founded the food products line Newman's Own in 1982, according to Wikipedia and biography.com. Now, I knew of Newman's Own as a salad dressing, and that is what Newman's Own started with. But since starting with salad dressing, Newman's Own ended up expanding into other things like pasta sauce, lemonade, popcorn, salsa, and even wine. And what is super cool about Newman's Own, their products, is that all proceeds, like after taxes are paid, are donated to, good causes and charitable organizations. And I wanted to see, because I'm nosy, what charities that it supports. So I actually, while I was doing this episode's research, I Googled Newman's Own. And on the search results page, it said Newman's Own 100% of profits to kids. So they have a whole page on their website with information related to their mission of supporting kids, which I love, so you should check it out. I put a link in the source links for this episode, by the way. So now shifting to the end of Paul's life in 2008. According to Wikipedia, it was starting to be reported that Paul was not doing well. And specifically, the word on the street was that he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Of note, Paul did heavily and frequently smoke for many, many years. On September 26, 2008, it was reported that Paul died in his home, and his home is located in Westport, Connecticut. Following his death, it's confirmed that Paul definitely had an estate plan, and honestly, it was a pretty elaborate one, which included not only planning for his personal assets, but also included a foundation to support Newman's own. So let's dive in to see what was going on and what ended up happening to Paul's estate that was reported to be in the neighborhood of over $600 million. According to liveabout.com, Paul's estate plan was originally signed in April 2008. And remember, he passed away in September of that same year. But even after it was signed in April 2008, it was subsequently amended in July of 2008. His estate plan consisted, like I said, of a foundation for Newman's own, but for his personal assets, he did have a last will and testament that dealt with some of his personal assets, but ultimately that will distributed assets to the Newman Living Trust number 1. So a few things that I want to note about his estate plan. First, for Paul's airplanes and race cars, which sounds funny to say. I mean, I guess these are high net worth individuals. But for Paul's airplanes and race cars, the executors were ordered to sell them and put them in his, what it's called in my little world, a residuary estate, which basically means that they turned into cash after they got sold, of course. And that cash got dumped into his estate to be distributed according to his estate plan. For Paul's theatrical awards, so you think like his Oscars and Golden Globes and Emmys and those sort of things, those were to be distributed to his foundation, the Newman's Own Foundation. All of his personal property, so think of things like household things, instruments, cars, besides his race cars, etc. Those were all of his personal property was supposed to be distributed to his wife, Joanne. Now, all of Paul's non-foundation business interests that he was involved in, so just to kind of name drop a few, he was involved in a business, Coleytown Productions, Aspatuck Productions, and Newman Foreman Productions. So those all spit out like royalties and income, and the business interest as well as the royalties and income that he received were to be distributed to his Newman Living Trust number 1. Two last things to note. First was that his April 2008 will left all of his real estate to his wife, Joanne. But then that July 2008 amendment left just the Westport, Connecticut house to Joanne. And this last thing is, once all of this very kind of specific stuff got taken care of, and I chose to skip over a few other things, though I don't want to bore you with all the legal gobbledygook. All the remaining part of Paul's estate went to his Newman Living Trust number 1. Now, there's honestly very little known about Newman Living Trust number 1. That's kind of a tongue twister. Because that's like the whole point of a trust. It's to ideally keep things nice and private. Though one thing that is known, and according to liveabout.com article, is that the trust created a subtrust called a marital trust to support his wife, Joanne. This whole marital trust setup is super common in my estate world for a few different reasons. So first, like I said, trust planning keeps things nice and private. Second, doing marital trust planning as part of like a bigger trust plan allows someone to do some estate tax planning, which I just did an episode on, right? On estate taxes. That was just a few episodes back. And third, it allows for Paul, as the trust creator, to be certain that a very specific distribution plan is not only documented, but also has to be followed later. And with being a blended family, so first marriage, second marriage, kids from 2 relationships, etc., This setup likely made a ton of sense for Paul to ensure that Joanne, as his second wife, could not, quote, take away from the inheritance for Paul's kids from his first marriage. The really big drama in Paul's estate actually came relating to the foundation, Newman's own foundation. So let's dive into that quickly. According to a blog by a law firm in Michigan called Estate Planning and Elder Law Services, PC, even though Newman's own foundation was founded by Paul and his friend A.E., Paul was actually the sole member of the foundation when it was born. So to me, that sounds like maybe A.E. just kind of helped Paul get it off the ground, so to speak. But really it was Paul's baby, which makes sense since it's called Newman's own after all. Fast forward time, and now we're in the last few months of Paul's life. A few months prior to Paul's death, Paul executed a document called Consent of Sole Member. And in that document, he made his friends and advisors, Robert Forrester and Brian Murphy, the second and third members of the foundation. So then, when he died, his children were surprised to learn that none of the family, his children nor his wife, were on the board for Newman's own foundation. Consequently, two of Paul's children, specifically Eleanor and Susan, sued Newman's own foundation. And even though Paul died in 2008, this lawsuit just came about last year in 2022. Personally, I find it kind of interesting that Eleanor and Susan came from the different marriages. So I think Susan was from maybe the first marriage and Eleanor was from the second marriage. So it almost seems like to me that the blended family united on this front and went after the foundation. In their lawsuit, they claimed that one of the directors acted in his capacity as a director improperly, and that undue influence was exerted over Paul in his dying days when the change was made. So far, this lawsuit has not been resolved or settled. So even though Paul died in 2008, 15 years ago, things are still lingering now in 2023. Most recently, relating to the lawsuit, the foundation's CEO stepped down at the end of 2022. Though currently now, we're sitting here in November of 2023. Like I said, the lawsuit is still pending. So I don't have an ending to share with you on this front, which is so crazy since he died 15 years ago. I think the big takeaway here, and it's something I've discussed here on Legal Tea before, is communication. Last time we chatted about communication in an estate planning venture was in the episode about Casey Kasem and his estate. And he too made some kind of last minute changes and he did not tell anybody, which ended up causing significant issues after he passed away. I have to wonder if the lawsuit that Susan and Eleanor brought could have been avoided by clear communication by Paul to his kids and spouse. But maybe not. Since he made this change in the 11th hour, that's kind of part of the kids' argument, that there was some undue influence going on in Paul's final days. So whether there was or wasn't undue influence, that's not for me to decide. All I know from my chair is that first, clear communication and being transparent is often helpful and important in an estate planning venture. And second, waiting until the 11th hour to do your plan or to make changes is going to be ripe for issues. And I see that happen all the time in real life in my practice. Alrighty, we are ready to wrap this episode up, my friends. Next week, I am taking the week off. It's Thanksgiving week. It's a short week. So during the short, 1 week break, maybe it will give you some time to catch up on some missed episodes or something, or you could find your favorite episode and listen to it on the way to, a family or friend get together. I know I'm stretching here. I'm stretching. Anyway, the following week after Thanksgiving, I will be back. So what is that? I think that's going to be November 28th. So on that episode, we will be diving into a cautionary tale type of episode. So that's what's going to be up next. So until then, take care, be well, have a great Thanksgiving day and week. And as I always say jokingly to my uncle on Thanksgiving, make sure you show up to the festivities wearing stretchy pants. Talk to you soon, my friends. Bye-bye.